A dark alternative history, the fall of Britain and the triumph of the Third Reich, the year in 1940, and the world teeters on the edge of an abyss. The German war machine, under the iron-fisted rule of Adolf Hitler, has already conquered much of Europe. France has fallen, its once proud cities now occupied by the Wehrmacht. The Low Countries are subdued, their populations cowed under the jackboot of Nazi oppression. The Soviet Union, though vast and formidable, remains neutral, bound by the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Across the Atlantic, the United States clings to its isolationist policies, unwilling to intervene in what many Americans see as a distant European conflict. The last bastion of resistance against the Nazi onslaught is Great Britain, an island nation standing alone against the tide of fascism. Now, before we move on, please help a small channel grow. Please like and subscribe. If you have any comments, good or bad, leave them below. Back to the story. But what if Britain had fallen? What if Operation Sea Lion, the planned German invasion of the British Isles, had succeeded? What if the Royal Navy had been overwhelmed, the Royal Air Force grounded, and the British government forced to capitulate? In this dark alternative history, the fall of Britain would have been the turning point that allowed Nazi Germany to win the Second World War. This essay explores the grim scenario in which the Third Reich emerges victorious, reshaping the world in its twisted image. The fall of Britain, Operation Sea Lion succeeds. The success of Operation Sea Lion hinged on several critical factors, all of which would have had to align perfectly for Germany to achieve victory. In this alternate timeline, the Luftwaffe manages to gain air superiority over the Royal Air Force during the Battle of Britain. The relentless bombing of British airfields, radar stations, and factories cripples the RAF's ability to defend the skies. The German Navy, though outmatched by the Royal Navy, manages to secure a narrow corridor across the English Channel, thanks to a combination of daring U-boat operations, mine-laying, and the use of captured French and Dutch vessels. The Kriegsmarine's sacrifice is immense, but it buys enough time for the first wave of German troops to land on the southern coast of England. The British Army, weakened by the evacuation of Dunkirk and stretched thin defending the coastline, is unable to repel the invasion. German panzer divisions, supported by elite paratroopers, quickly secure key strategic points. London, battered by the Blitz, falls after a brutal urban battle. Prime Minister Winston Churchill, refusing to surrender, is either killed or captured, and the British government collapses. King George VI and the royal family flee to Canada, establishing a government in exile, but the heart of the British Empire is now under Nazi control. The immediate aftermath, a Nazi Britain. With Britain subdued, Germany consolidates its hold over Western Europe. The British Isles are divided into occupation zones, with Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland subjected to harsh military rule. The SS begins its campaign of terror, targeting resistance groups, intellectuals, and anyone deemed a threat to Nazi ideology. The British people, once proud and defiant, are crushed under the weight of oppression. The industrial capacity of Britain is harnessed for the German war effort, with factories repurposed to produce weapons, vehicles, and supplies for the Wehrmacht. The fall of Britain has far-reaching consequences for the global balance of power. The British Empire, already strained by the war, begins to unravel. Colonies in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East are left vulnerable, and many fall under German or Axis influence. The Mediterranean becomes a Nazi lake, with Gibraltar seized and the Suez Canal under threat. The United States, now facing the prospect of a Nazi-dominated Europe, begins to reconsider its isolationist stance, but it is too late to prevent the consolidation of German power. The Eastern Front, a swift victory over the Soviet Union. With Britain out of the war, Hitler turns his full attention to the East. Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, is launched in the spring of 1941, as in our timeline. However, without the need to divert resources to the Western Front, the German war machine is far more formidable. The Wehrmacht, bolstered by British industry and resources, advances deeper into Soviet territory. Moscow falls in late 1941, and Stalin's regime collapses. The Soviet Union fractures into warring factions, with some regions falling under German control and others descending into chaos. The capture of Soviet oil fields in the Caucasus secures Germany's energy needs, while the vast agricultural lands of Ukraine provide food for the Reich. The SS begins its genocidal campaign in earnest, exterminating millions of Jews, Slavs, and other undesirables in the occupied territories. The Holocaust reaches unimaginable proportions as the Nazis implement their vision of a racially pure empire. The Mediterranean and Middle East, Axis dominance with Britain defeated, the Axis powers turn their attention to the Mediterranean and the Middle East. Italy, emboldened by Germany's success, launches a more effective campaign in North Africa. The Suez Canal falls to Axis forces, cutting off British supply lines to India and the Far East. The Middle East, rich in oil, becomes a key battleground. Pro-Axis regimes rise to power in Iraq and Iran, further strengthening Germany's strategic position. Turkey, pressured by the Axis powers, joins the war on their side, providing a gateway to the Caucasus and Central Asia. The Axis powers now control a vast swath of territory stretching from the Atlantic Ocean to the borders of India. The British Empire, once the largest in history, is reduced to a shadow of its former self, with only Canada, Australia, and a few other dominions remaining free from Axis control. The United States, isolationism and defeat. The United States, though alarmed by the fall of Britain and the expansion of Nazi power, remains hesitant to enter the war. President Franklin D. Roosevelt faces strong opposition from isolationists in Congress, who argue that America should focus on defending its own hemisphere rather than intervening in Europe. Without the support of Britain, the US lacks a staging ground for an invasion of Europe. The Atlantic Ocean, once a barrier against Nazi aggression, becomes a moat protecting a fortress of tyranny. By the time the US finally enters the war, it is too late. Germany, now in control of Europe, the Middle East, and much of Asia, is an unstoppable force. The Axis powers develop advanced weapons, including jet aircraft, ballistic missiles, and even early nuclear technology. The US Navy, though powerful, is unable to break the Axis stranglehold on the Atlantic. The war drags on for years, but the outcome is inevitable. In 1947, the United States, exhausted and facing the prospect of a nuclear attack, sues for peace. A Nazi world order. With the defeat of the United States, the Axis powers establish a new world order. Europe is reorganized into a greater German Reich, with puppet states and occupied territories under Nazi control. The Holocaust is completed, with the Jewish population of Europe and beyond systematically exterminated. The SS, now a global force, enforces Nazi ideology across the conquered lands. Resistance movements are crushed, and dissent is met with brutal reprisals. In Asia, Japan consolidates its control over China, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific. The Axis powers divide the world into spheres of influence, with Germany dominating Europe, Africa, and the Middle East, while Japan rules over Asia and the Pacific. The United States, though not occupied, is reduced to a second-rate power, its economy shattered and its influence diminished. Conclusion: a dark and endless night. In this alternate history, the fall of Britain marks the beginning of a dark and endless night for humanity. The triumph of the Third Reich leads to a world dominated by tyranny, genocide, and oppression. The ideals of freedom, democracy, and human rights are extinguished, replaced by the brutal ideology of Nazism. The Holocaust, already one of the greatest crimes in human history, becomes even more horrific as the Nazis extend their genocidal campaign across the globe. This dark timeline serves as a chilling reminder of what might have been. It underscores the importance of the sacrifices made by those who fought against the Axis powers, and the fragility of the freedoms we often take for granted. The fall of Britain was averted in our timeline, but in this alternate history, it becomes the catalyst for a nightmare from which the world might never have awakened. Please like and subscribe.